Diddy behind bars in New York after a federal indictment last week. But what led up to these federal charges? A series of civil lawsuits that first sounded the alarm on the shocking allegations against him. We're taking a look at all 11 civil suits filed against P. Diddy and where they stand now that he's been arrested. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs, a once beloved and celebrated music artist and entrepreneur, now faces federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a grand jury last week and taken into custody at a Manhattan hotel. After that, he was booked in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center. He's been denied bail twice since then, a federal judge ruling that's where Diddy will remain as he awaits trial. At court appearances last week, Diddy denied the charges and pleaded not guilty. His legal team has been very outspoken, calling the accusations, quote, the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide. After his arrest, Diddy's attorney Mark Agnifilo released a statement saying in part, quote, "We are disappointed with the decision to pursue what we believe is an unjust prosecution of Mr. Combs by the U.S. Attorney's Office." Agnifilo went on to say that Diddy will likely testify at his trial to explain his side of the story. But at trial, we can also expect some strong testimony from government witnesses, likely in the way of civil plaintiffs, whose shocking allegations are what led to Diddy's arrest and indictment in the first place. There have been 11 civil suits filed against P. Diddy in the last year, and it's only apropos to start with the suit filed by Casandra Ventura, who you probably know as the singer Cassie. Cassie filed her lawsuit on November 16th of last year under the New York Survivor Act. That act meant any sexual assault survivor could file civil suit against their alleged abuser, regardless of the statute of limitations. Several other plaintiffs also filed under the same act. In Cassie's 35-page lawsuit, she lays out the history of her allegedly abusive relationship with Diddy that began when she was just 19 years old. At the time, he was 37. Cassie says Diddy began, quote, almost immediately asserting possession and control over her and inserting himself into all aspects of her career and her personal life. That includes things like forcing Cassie to use illegal drugs and have sex with prostitutes as Diddy watched or masturbated. Cassie's lawsuit also states that multiple times each year, Mr. Combs would violently beat Miss Ventura, leaving bruises on her body. He would later hide Miss Ventura in hotels for days at a time to let her bruises heal. We saw evidence of this brutal abuse when CNN released a graphic video showing Diddy assault Cassie in a hotel hallway. The release of that video led to Diddy posting this one.
It's so difficult to reflect on the darkest times in your life, but sometimes you gotta do that. I was up. I hit rock bottom, but I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it, I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy, and go into rehab. Had to ask God for His mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but the civil suits just kept on coming. On November 23rd of last year, 2 more survivors filed suit against Diddy in New York. Let's begin with Liza Gardner. Liza's allegations date back to New York in 1990. She met Diddy and Aaron Hall at an event, and the pair were handsy with Liza and her friend. Liza and her friend then went to an after party where she, quote, was offered more drinks and was coerced into having sex with Combs. The lawsuit goes on to allege, quote, after Combs finished doing his business, Liza Gardner laid in bed, shocked and traumatized. As she was in the process of getting dressed, Hall barged into the room, pinned her down, and forced Liza Gardner to have sex with him. Then days later, Liza alleges Diddy came to the place where she was staying. The lawsuit says he was, quote, irate and began assaulting and choking Liza Gardner to the point that she passed out. According to Liza's lawsuit, she demands a jury trial, and the case is still open and ongoing. So too is the civil suit brought by Joy Dickerson Neal. That's the other one who filed suit on November 23rd of last year. Her allegations date back to 1991, when she was a psychology student at Syracuse University. Joy knew Diddy because they had mutual friends, and she'd appeared in a few of his music videos. So the pair went out on a date, but Joy says Diddy intentionally drugged her, resulting in her being in a physical state where she could not independently stand or walk. After that, she alleges Diddy raped her and recorded it on video. She found out about this tape a few days later when a friend revealed he'd seen it. The next suit filed against Diddy came from a woman identifying herself only as Jane Doe. Her suit was filed on December 2nd, 2023. While Jane Doe doesn't list her name in the lawsuit, she does list multiple photos of herself and Diddy. Her allegations date back to 2003, when she was just 17 years old and in the 11th grade. Her lawsuit states at this time, Diddy was twice her age and one of the most well-known and influential music artists of all time. She met one of Diddy's friends, Harvey Pierre, who was listed as a co-defendant in her lawsuit at a club near Detroit. So Harvey Pierre says Diddy would love to meet Jane Doe and even calls him on the phone. After that, they take a private jet to New York. Once there, Jane Doe says the evening became a blur, but she was raped by Diddy, Harvey Pierre, and an unidentified other person at Diddy's studio. The next lawsuit brings the accusations against Diddy into 2024, when Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod, filed his civil suit. Lil Rod alleges he was, quote, the victim of constant, unsolicited, and unauthorized groping and touching of his anus by Mr. Combs. At times, Lil Rod says Diddy touched his private areas without consent and forced Lil Rod to watch him shower or have naked body massages. He also alleges Diddy was grooming him to engage in gay sex and even forced Lil Rod to have sex with a prostitute. Lil Rod says his allegations are corroborated with hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff, and his guests engaging in some serious illegal activity because Diddy apparently required Lil Rod to record him constantly. We believe it was this allegation, proof of the illegal activity on video or audio recordings, that led to the federal raids on two of Diddy's homes. Those search warrants were executed on March 25th, and we've since confirmed the feds collected some electronic evidence then, as well as 1,000 bottles of baby oil and personal lubricant. That brings us to the next lawsuit, filed on April 4th by Grace Omar K. Diddy's listed as a co-defendant on this suit, along with his son Christian, or King Combs. She alleges that on December 28, 2022, while working as a yacht deckhand, she was sexually assaulted by a heavily intoxicated Christian Combs, who forced her to perform oral sex on him. According to the lawsuit, she believes Diddy is liable for this, as he allegedly facilitated the assault by chartering the yacht. On May 21st, another civil suit was filed by model Crystal McKinney, who alleges Diddy sexually assaulted her at his studio in New York. McKinney alleges Diddy gave her a joint laced with narcotics to smoke, and after that, Combs pressured her to imbibe more alcohol and marijuana by telling her that she was acting too uptight. After that, Diddy allegedly forced her into the bathroom, where he began kissing her without consent. Combs then shoved her head down to his crotch before commanding her to suck it. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, plaintiff refused, but Combs pushed her head down onto his phallus and forced her to perform oral sex on him. After that, she became physically ill. The allegations we're talking about today against P. Diddy are truly shocking, but the plaintiffs filing them are seeking justice for these alleged assaults. And if you're injured, you can do the same. I'm talking about our sponsor and proud partner of Law&Crime, Morgan & Morgan. They have an army of over 1,000 attorneys who will fight for what you deserve. Not to mention, they have a pretty impressive track record of wins under their belt. So if you're ever hurt or seriously injured, turn to Morgan & Morgan. Your case could be worth millions. Start a claim in 8 clicks or less at forthepeople.com/YouTubeTakeover. Just days after McKinney filed this lawsuit, on May 23rd, another lawsuit was filed against Diddy, this time by April Lampros. According to her suit, Lampros met Diddy in 1994 when she was studying at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. The next year, she alleges Diddy pressured her to drink alcohol and later took her to a hotel to rape her. A second assault allegedly happened in a parking garage when Mr. Combs grabbed Ms. Lampros by the waist and forced her down to her knees. He quickly unzipped his pants, exposing his erect penis. He then grabbed her hair, wrapping it around her fist. He then forced his erect penis into her mouth and demanded Ms. Lampros perform oral sex. The lawsuit goes on to describe two more instances when Diddy allegedly raped her in 1996 and 2000. As recently as 2023, Lampros was at an event when a guest told the man she was dating he'd seen a video of Lampros having sex with Diddy. This man, whose name was redacted from the lawsuit, shared that he saw this tape during the summer of 1997. Lampros was told that Diddy recorded them having sex without her knowledge, and he would go on to show that video to multiple people. That brings us to June 10th of this year, when Derek Lee Cardello Smith filed a personal injury complaint against Diddy, also alleging sexual assault. As a note, Cardello Smith is currently behind bars for criminal sexual conduct and kidnapping convictions. He's set to be released in 2026. Now, according to his suit, in the midst of a sexual encounter in 1997, Diddy told him, quote, "Drink this one." And I thought it was another glass of Jim Beam. So I took it because I had sat one down in the other room, and then I drank some more. And I stayed sitting there and began getting drowsy and started to pass out. And then Sean Combs said to me, "I added a little something to it for you. I will get that from you anyway, one way or another." And then I passed out. Cardello Smith alleges Diddy offered him $2.3 million to make this alleged sexual assault go away, but he says the payout never came. A judge initially ordered Diddy to pay Cardello Smith $100 million, but just one day after Diddy's arrest, a judge ruled Diddy no longer has to pay. That brings us to this month, when former Danity Kane band member Don Richard filed suit against Diddy as well. Diddy helped form and mentor the band on MTV's Making the Band 3, and Richard alleges that's where her abuse began. Not only does Richard say she witnessed Diddy physically assault Cassie, but she claims Diddy threatened her life when she offered to help Cassie, saying things like, "You want to die today?" and "I end people." The lawsuit also states that throughout the productions of Making the Band 3 and 4, Mr. Combs deprived Ms. Richard and her Danity Kane bandmates of basic needs such as adequate food and sleep. Richard also referenced some of Diddy's parties, like a specific one in November 2009. There were many well-known celebrities at the after party, and copious amounts of illegal drugs were being openly consumed. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs had arranged for dozens of young women and girls, some of whom appeared to be underage, to be transported to the party. That was the last suit filed before Diddy's arrest, but just 1 week after his indictment, another accuser filed suit. That's Thalia Graves, who alleges Diddy and his bodyguard raped her in 2001. According to her lawsuit, Diddy picked her up from her mom's house, and as she drank what had been handed to her, she started to feel lightheaded, dizzy, and physically weak. In retrospect, it is clear that Combs had used a drug to be put into plaintiff's drink, as a few sips of wine had never impacted her this way. Diddy drove Graves to his studio, and when she regained consciousness, she was naked and her hands were tied behind her back with what felt like a plastic grocery bag. Plaintiff shouted for help. In response, Sherman, that's the bodyguard, lifted her up from the couch and forcefully slammed her face down on what was apparently a pool table. Shortly thereafter, Combs entered the room naked. After that, Graves alleges both men raped her, and after that, threatened her that if she told anyone about it, she could lose custody of her son. That brings the lawsuits filed against Diddy to the double digits, reaching 11 in all. But to dig deeper, we have to bring in Law&Crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman. So to start talking about civil lawsuits, now we have Diddy, who has been indicted. He's in New York, he's behind bars, he is awaiting his federal trial. But I'm wondering, would any of these charges or the investigation into Diddy have even happened without these civil lawsuits?
It's a great question with no easy answer in it. And I would say that many people think this started with the lawsuit by Cassie Ventura. It kind of opened the floodgates, first of all, for the other civil suits that eventually happened. But it seemed to be something that the federal government honed in on because all of the investigations seemed to happen right after that case was settled, I believe, overnight. So one wonders if not for this civil litigation, would he be in the federal criminal predicament that he is today?
The major lawsuits that people always go back to are Cassie's and Lil Rod's. So let's start with Cassie because she was the first one, as you said, to kind of open the floodgates there. How important is Cassie going to be in the federal case against Diddy? Would she possibly testify? Anything like that?
So remember, we don't know all the details of this case because, as you may recall in the indictment, they don't even mention specific names of any of the alleged victims. We're all guessing that victim number one is Cassie Ventura. And so we assume that she will be integral in terms of the case against Sean Combs. But again, I hate to say we're guessing because that's all anyone is doing in a sense. But remember, any case against Sean Combs is going to require not just the witnesses. Obviously, a jury can rely on what a witness says, but I think a jury is going to also want corroboration. What other evidence supports what these witnesses say? Is there video? Is there physical evidence? And that's something we know at least one video exists, the one with Sean Combs and Cassie Ventura. But remember, that doesn't make out the bulk of the case. And so, what other evidence is going to support and corroborate the witnesses in this case? And time will tell regarding that.
That leads into my next question perfectly because Lil Rod filed suit back in February and he made note to hundreds of hours of video and audio recordings that he says he has a lot of these showing Diddy doing some pretty illegal activity. So, right there, he's saying, hey, you know what? I have the evidence. Do you think that that allegation could have led to the federal raids that were just the next month when we now that we've seen the indictment know that they did collect some electronic evidence?
Absolutely, I think it's a possibility. I think it's quite frankly a probability that this lawsuit, along with Cassie Ventura's, eventually led to the federal investigation. Again, we haven't seen these videos. We don't know what's on these videos. Simply someone doing drugs on a video in and of itself does not make out the crimes of which they're alleging. And Lil Rod, we also know, has some baggage of his own. I think the federal government is going to need and want, and I assume they have, although again, I'm guessing, the corroboration they believe they need to make out a strong case against Sean Combs.
We talked about how in the indictment it only refers to victim one. So we have all of these allegations, 11 civil suits in all, but only victim one. Could we expect, though, to hear from additional victims or accusers in this case?
Yes, it is certainly possible. Also, don't forget it is possible that there will eventually be an additional indictment. It is not unheard of for the federal government to indict an individual and then right before trial add additional charges against that person. And so I think it's interesting because when you start to hear some of the defense talks about there being one victim and one victim only. And it leaves those of us who are kind of watching from the sidelines wondering, is it really only Cassie Ventura that's going to be speaking out in regards to what happened? Are there going to be more individuals? One would assume that Cassie Ventura was not a witness to all of the alleged criminal activity that they're alleging.
What happens now in terms of these civil suits? Because Diddy is behind bars as of now. We know that he's moving forward in the judicial system with his own criminal charges. But what about these civil cases? There's 11 as of right now. Are they just on pause?
Well, I'm not sure that they're on pause because certainly their attorneys are not going to want to be on pause. Obviously, if he was found guilty of criminal activity, that could potentially help all or at least some of those civil litigants. But I think each of them are potentially moving forward. Remember, they have separate attorneys, separate clients. They're at different stages of the discovery process. And so I think they're going to be moving, but again, I think probably a slower pace than one would have anticipated. Certainly, I don't expect what we saw with regards to Cassie Ventura when the civil suit ended within a day or a week of the filing.
So Diddy was arrested last week, taken into custody, and then this week we saw an additional lawsuit that was filed by Thalia Graves. She brought forth these allegations against Diddy, and that bumped us up to the number 11. So we're at that number right now. Do you think it's possible that even more civil suits come out?
Anything's possible, Sierra. I mean, anytime there's one lawsuit, two lawsuits, three lawsuits, you're going to start to see people come out of the woodwork. And I'm not questioning their credibility, but credibility is always an issue, and we can't forget that. Because the natural question people ask is, why didn't you come forward originally? Why are you coming forward so late in the game? What is the corroboration? Just like with a criminal case, what is the corroboration that supports your claims? Now, keep in mind, civil suits are easier because the requirement in terms of what you must prove is much lower than it is in a criminal case, which can sometimes, I'm not saying with everyone, motivate someone to file a civil suit. You're also potentially looking for monetary damages, which can have an influence. Don't forget, if any of these witnesses are now testifying at the criminal case, that's going to be something the defense attorney is going to question them on, as to whether or not they have a bias, a skin in the game, if you will, to see Sean Combs convicted so that they can have a payoff later.
After Diddy's arrest, he pleaded not guilty to the federal charges against him. A statement from his legal team reads, quote, Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of these charges. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. That's all for now, but there's sure to be more developments ahead of Diddy's next court appearance on October 9th. For all those updates, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page. For Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.